I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's take a minute to think about the words that I just said. One nation, under God. Whose God? Which God? What does that really entail, seeing as more than 1 in 5 people in America have no religious affiliation? Religion in America has existed since the beginning. Although we've always been a country that emphasized separation of church and state, religion has always and will always be within our foundations. As we can see, in our currency, in many of our monuments, and even on public property, religion, especially Christian religion, has always existed in America. However, recent years have shown that many people are becoming frustrated with this because it's not really representative of our population, especially with respect to the idea that all of these religions that are really represented in America's foundations are Christian religions. And when other religions are introduced into our society, people really dislike those types of things. For instance, this monument was recently taken down because there was a lot of people who were getting angry about the fact that it's on public property and it's a cross, which represents a Christian religion, which is not representative of the American people and government property as a whole. Well, one of the major beginnings of people moving away from the religion that was set into our society as a whole began with the legalization of abortion in Roe v. Wade in 1973. In 1973, it was ruled that a fetus cannot be considered a human person and therefore does not deserve to have the rights embedded in the Constitution for all people. After this happened, millions of people, especially those who had Christian foundations, were very, very angry about this sort of thing and religious foundations. So yearly, there's this thing called the March for Life, which brings in about 50,000 to more or less people who march on Washington, D.C., essentially for the lives that they consider to have been lost. This was a very interesting case because it didn't bring religion into the courtroom necessarily due to the separation of church and state, but outside of the courtroom, there was a really big discussion about whether or not, the discussion of when life begins at conception is technically a religious discussion because there's no way to scientifically prove anything about the beginning of life. So outside of the courtroom, there was a lot of talk in America, but essentially what was decided was that because there is separation of church and state, there is no way to say that abortion would be illegal in the early trimesters of pregnancy. Another statistic that we see is that 1 in 5 Americans are not religious, and this number is increasing exponentially each year. In 2002, the Secular Coalition for America was formed, and this sort of was the idea to promote more secularism in America. Now, saying this to somebody who isn't completely familiar with the way that the American government works as a whole would sort of cause confusion because we do have separation of church and state in our Constitution. However, it's not really that well practiced, and therefore this coalition was made to make sure that moral religious ideas were not being put into our government everyday use so that everybody in America could be equally represented without other people's religious beliefs impeding on this. And here would be the first, in 2007, this man was elected as the first member of Congress. He was openly atheist. So this is a really big thing in America because think about how long our government has existed and nobody who is openly atheist has ever been in Congress before him. And now this number has grown exponentially. So in 2002, a case was brought to the Supreme Court which a man was objecting to the use of one nation under God in our Pledge of Allegiance to the flag in the case of his daughter. So essentially they ruled that it was unconstitutional, but then when the case went to the Supreme Court, so in favor of the man who didn't want these words in the Pledge of Allegiance anymore, they decided that because he had no legal standing and he wasn't the legal guardian of his daughter, they just got rid of the case altogether. However, they did originally rule that it was unconstitutional to have these words. And then in 2011, the Affordable Care Act came out, which essentially mandated that every single person be given forms of contraception and birth control who had healthcare and who were under the healthcare, and this healthcare was provided to everyone. Now, there was a lot of objection to this in society as a whole because a lot of people don't like contraception, especially those with religious backgrounds, and there was eventually a law made that said that you could object to this if you had religious reasons for it. So which goes back, actually, this sort of farthers the idea of separation of church and state, because you do have freedom of religion and you are allowed to object on these sort of things. But the fact that so many people didn't want there to be contraception at all shows, and that it wasn't free until 2011 in this way, shows that religion is so embedded into our government and we don't even realize it. And then also in 2014, there was a court case brought forward to get rid of "In God We Trust" on the currency. However, it was rejected because it's very hard to take back all of your currency just to take off one phrase on it. Thank you.